Long before maple syrup and hockey, Canada's story began with Indigenous peoples who thrived for millennia. Then came European explorers, bloody conflicts, and an unlikely union of colonies. How did this vast land become the Canada we know today? From Viking settlements to Confederation, this is the history of Canada, a journey through time, struggle, and triumph. Whispers from the land before time, the untold dawn of Canada. Long before the first sails touched the Atlantic horizon, a vast and wild land echoed with the heartbeat of ancient footsteps. Across an icy bridge from Siberia, the first peoples arrived, explorers not of oceans but of survival, settling into what would become the spirit of Canada at least 14,000 years ago. In places like Old Crow Flats and Bluefish Caves, they hunted, gathered, traded, and built communities with complex hierarchies, long before a single European name was ever spoken. Some civilizations flourished, others vanished, leaving behind only whispers buried in earth and stone. The land itself remembers them. The First Nations, the Inuit of the frozen north, and the Métis, born of two worlds in the crucible of colonial contact. Their stories are not gone. They are hidden, waiting to be unearthed by those who still listen to the wind. Curious what happened when the first outsiders arrived on this sacred land? Echoes of silence, the price of first contact. When the first European ships brushed against Canada's shores, the land was already alive with the voices of up to 500,000 Indigenous souls, keepers of vast knowledge, sacred rhythms, and enduring communities. What followed was not just contact but collision. Diseases swept through villages like ghost winds, stealing generations overnight. Battles were fought not only with muskets but with broken promises, land stolen piece by piece under the guise of treaties, and cultures slowly suffocated under the weight of forced assimilation. Once partners in exploration, the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit became targets of a colonial campaign that climaxed in cultural genocide. And yet, even as settler colonialism tried to silence them, the spirit of these peoples never vanished. It endured. Today, a fragile path of reconciliation has begun, but the echoes of what was lost still haunt the soil. Do you want to explore the birth of European Canada next? Footprints in the wilderness, the rise of New France. Long before bustling cities and railroads etched the Canadian landscape, it was a wilderness charted by dreams and daring. Leif Erikson's fleeting Norse village on Newfoundland whispered the first echoes of Europe, but it was centuries later that the real tide came in, wooden ships creaking under explorers' feet and kings' ambitions. John Cabot and Jacques Cartier claimed vast, unknown lands for distant crowns, laying the seeds of empires in icy soil. French settlers carved out fragile homes on the St. Lawrence while fur traders and missionaries vanished into the woods, chasing beaver pelts and souls. They met resistance, not just from the unforgiving wild, but from nations who had lived here for millennia. As the beaver wars erupted in the shadows of rivers and forests, New France took root, not just as a colony, but as a fragile dream suspended between survival and conquest. The struggle for dominion, the clash of empires. As European powers spread their reach, the shores of Canada became a battleground for dominance. The English, relentless in their pursuit of expansion, planted their flags in Newfoundland by 1610, alongside their ever-growing settlements in the 13 colonies. Tensions simmered between the French and British, their rivalry igniting a series of bloody wars fought across the wilderness. The clash raged for decades, each battle a testament to the stakes of empire. By 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht shifted the tides, ceding Nova Scotia to the British, a stark sign of the changing balance of power. But it was the aftermath of the 7 Years' War that forever altered the fate of New France. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris sealed the fate of Canada, and the once vibrant French colonies fell under British control, leaving the land forever marked by the scars of conquest and the promise of a new, uncertain future. The formation of British North America, a tapestry of tensions and transformation. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 marked a pivotal moment in Canadian history, carving out a new colonial landscape from the ashes of New France. The creation of Quebec, the annexation of Cape Breton Island, and the establishment of First Nations treaty rights were significant steps in shaping the future. The Quebec Act of 1774 further solidified British control, expanding Quebec's borders and granting it a unique autonomy at a time when unrest brewed in the 13 colonies. While Quebec was granted freedoms such as the preservation of French language and Catholicism, the act stoked the fires of rebellion in the American colonies, ultimately culminating in the American Revolution. With the Treaty of Paris in 1783, Britain was forced to cede vast swaths of land to the newly formed United States. Yet this loss became Canada's gain as waves of loyalists, Those loyal to the crown fled north, bringing with them English traditions and reshaping the demographic makeup of the Maritimes and central Canada. The Constitutional Act of 1791 carved Canada into Upper and Lower Canada, dividing it between French-speaking Quebec and English-speaking Ontario, and marking the beginning of Canada's long, complex evolution as a nation divided by language, culture, and allegiance. The struggle for identity and expansion. Canada's path to responsible government. The War of 1812 brought the Canadas to the forefront of a bitter conflict between the United States and the United Kingdom, yet when peace finally came in 1815, the boundaries remained unchanged. Following the war, Canada experienced a surge in immigration, with over 960,000 arrivals from Britain between 1815 and 1850, including refugees from the Irish famine and displaced Scots. However, many immigrants met a tragic fate, with a staggering 25 to 33% succumbing to infectious diseases. The desire for self-governance boiled over into the rebellions of 1837, which ultimately led to the landmark Durham Report that recommended not only responsible government but also the assimilation of French Canadians into English culture. In response, the Act of Union 1840 merged Upper and Lower Canada into the Province of Canada, ushering in responsible government by 1855. Meanwhile, territorial disputes simmered, from the Oregon boundary dispute with the United States to the tensions over the Alaska-Yukon border, all while new British colonies were being established on the west coast, setting the stage for an expanding and evolving Canada. Canada's growth, from Confederation to expansion. On July 1, 1867, the British North America Act officially marked the birth of Canadian Confederation, with 4 founding provinces: Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. Over the following years, Canada expanded rapidly, with the Métis-led Red River Rebellion in 1870 leading to the creation of Manitoba. British Columbia joined in 1871, followed by Prince Edward Island in 1873, as promises of a transcontinental railway were made. The Yukon Territory was formed in 1898 during the Klondike Gold Rush, while Alberta and Saskatchewan became provinces in 1905. This expansion was fueled by the promise of land and opportunities for settlers, with the government sponsoring railways, settlement programs, and the establishment of the Northwest Mounted Police. However, this westward expansion came at a devastating cost for Indigenous peoples. Displaced from their lands, many were forced onto reserves, suffering from the collapse of the plains bison, famine, disease, and government control through the Indian Act. Amid this upheaval, the landscape of Canada was permanently altered, with European settlers shaping the land and economy, but at the expense of the region's original inhabitants. Canada in the early 20th century, war, struggles, and independence. At the dawn of the 20th century, Canada's fate was deeply tied to Britain, especially as Britain's declaration of war in 1914 automatically brought Canada into the First World War. The Canadian Corps became a symbol of bravery, particularly at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. However, tensions brewed at home, particularly in Quebec, during the conscription crisis of 1917, where French-speaking Canadians vehemently opposed compulsory enlistment. By 1919, Canada had asserted its autonomy, joining the League of Nations, and in 1931, gaining full legislative independence with the Statute of Westminster. The 1930s brought the Great Depression, throwing the nation into hardship, but also sowing the seeds of a welfare state in Saskatchewan under Tommy Douglas. As Europe plunged into war again, Canada declared war on Germany in 1939, marking its growing independence from Britain. Throughout World War II, over 1 million Canadians served, fighting in major battles like the Dieppe Raid, the Normandy landings, and the liberation of the Netherlands. The war, despite another conscription crisis, ultimately left Canada stronger, both economically and militarily, solidifying its role as an independent and influential nation on the world stage. Canada in the contemporary era: identity, growth, and challenges. In the aftermath of the Great Depression, Newfoundland relinquished its self-governing status and became a British Crown colony in 1934, only to join Canada as a province in 1949 after 2 referendums. The post-war era ushered in rapid economic growth, with policies of successive Liberal governments shaping a new Canadian identity. Key moments during this time included the adoption of the maple leaf flag in 1965, the establishment of official bilingualism in 1969, and the declaration of official multiculturalism in 1971. Social programs like Medicare and the Canada Pension Plan were introduced, though some provinces resisted these federal policies. Canada also gained full sovereignty with the patriation of its constitution in 1982, culminating in the creation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Meanwhile, Quebec underwent a radical transformation during the Quiet Revolution of the 1960s, sparking a rise in nationalist sentiment. This was marked by the October Crisis of 1970, the emergence of the Part 1 Québécois, and two referendums on sovereignty, both of which ultimately failed to achieve independence. In 1997, the Supreme Court ruled that unilateral secession would be unconstitutional, and the Clarity Act was passed, setting the stage for future debates about Quebec's place within Canada. The period was one of significant evolution, from the formation of Nunavut in 1999 to the deepening discussions around the nation's unity and identity. Canada in the late 20th and early 21st century, struggles, tragedies, and resilience. The late 20th and early 21st centuries were marked by a series of crises and challenges that tested Canadian society and its values. In 1985, the explosion of Air India Flight 182 devastated the nation, claiming the lives of 331 people and becoming the largest mass murder in Canadian history. This was followed by the horrific École Polytechnique massacre in 1989, where a gunman targeted female students, intensifying the national conversation on gender-based violence. The Oka crisis of 1990 highlighted ongoing tensions between Indigenous groups and provincial governments, setting the stage for future confrontations. On the international stage, Canada joined the Gulf War in 1990 and participated in peacekeeping missions throughout the 1990s, including in the Balkans and Somalia, though the latter was marred by a dark chapter in Canadian military history. The 2000s saw Canada's involvement in Afghanistan, where the country suffered significant casualties, marking its deadliest military mission since the Korean War. Domestically, the country faced the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, which brought severe social and economic disruptions. In 2021, the revelation of potential mass graves near former residential schools reignited the painful conversation about the cultural genocide of Indigenous peoples. Further complicating matters, Canada found itself in a trade war with the United States and Mexico starting in 2025, as President Donald Trump imposed tariffs on goods entering the U.S., a stark reminder of the fragile nature of international relations. Through it all, Canada's resilience was tested, yet the nation continued to confront its past and work toward a more inclusive future. Canada's history is a tapestry of cultures, conflicts, and resilience. Which chapter fascinated you most? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey, help us share more stories, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more from History Love.